Hi, this is Lisa Blair. I'm a process-oriented facilitator with an international women-centered private practice. And in this video, I'm going to talk a bit about the training that I've received and my approach to working with clients in one-on-one sessions. So my background training is primarily in process work, or what's called process-oriented psychology outside of the US. It was started by Dr. Arnold Mindell and colleagues about 30 or so years ago. And it's primarily an awareness-based approach that comes from a depth psychological tradition. So it's kind of like a granddaughter of Jungian psychology. If you've heard of Carl Jung, he did a lot of work with dreams, the collective unconscious, and so many things. But it is definitely on the depth psychological tree of psychology. And the approach can be applied to wide varieties of situations, including working one-on-one with individuals, with couples, in small groups, all the way up to global conflicts. So Dr. Mindell, he initially began his studies as a quantum physicist at MIT. And then later, making a long story short, of course, later he moved to Zurich, Switzerland, and studied at the Jung Institute and became a Jungian analyst. After his work there, he decided to marry quantum physics with Jungian analysis, along with some other perspectives, such as wisdom from Aboriginal Australians, Taoism, Gestalt theory, systems theory. There's various psychological and indigenous wisdom and Eastern wisdom that kind of comes together that forms the basis of process work. So the basic idea behind process work theory and methodology is that we believe in following what clients would consider disturbing experiences. So in a nutshell, and this is oversimplifying things, but in a nutshell, let's say cognitive behavioral approaches to therapy would be about changing the client's way of thinking or behaving to kind of correct or fix a problem. And generally speaking, we wouldn't have that approach. We would have the approach of wanting to learn more about the disturbance that the client is feeling, whether that's in their inner life, in their relationship life, in their body, in their work in the world, wherever that difficulty, that problem, that challenge, that disturbance is occurring, we would want to inquire further and unfold that situation, if you will, unfold that experience in the client to find out, we call it the gold in the garbage, the meaning that's there waiting to be revealed, waiting to be known, the meaning, the intelligence, the beauty, the wisdom that is pregnant in that disturbance. So rather than fixing something or having the mentality of fixing something to get rid of it, we would think we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We realize it's problematic for you. We realize this is unpleasant. There's suffering. So it's not that we're okay with that. It's just that the approach to getting to the root of that, to the heart of that, is a different one than trying to kind of band-aid it or fix it or make it go away. So if we can unfold it and find out the meaning inherent in that experience, then that can bring insight to the client's life. It can foster change and transformation to kind of pick up or embody or embrace parts of ourselves that are kind of relegated to the shadows, if you will. So in process work theory, I'm going to consolidate it into a very short little lesson here, that we believe that process, a dreaming process, energy, experience comes from a kind of singular source in a way. You could call it God, you could call it the universe, you could call it the spirit, whatever you want to call it. It comes from a wise source, the dream maker, let's say. And that energy or process or experience comes through in different channels. So it comes through in our bodies, in our headaches, in our chronic and acute body symptoms, in the tumor that we have, in an illness that we have. It comes through our bodies. It comes through our nighttime dreams in the form of symbols. It comes through our relationships, our relationship difficulties. It comes through our inner life and what we're suffering with internally. It comes through where we are, how we're interacting in the world channel, what's happening for us there, what's happening for us in our work life, what's happening for us creatively. The basic idea is that that same energy process information is coming through these various channels. And so, as Dr. Mendel discovered, that we can tap into any one of those areas and get the same information. So if you are my client and you tell me a nighttime dream, I can understand the same information, the same process that's trying to reveal itself through the nighttime dream as it is through a body symptom that you're having, as it is through a relationship problem that you're having. So that is a really interesting aspect of process work theory and the way we practice. It's not that as a client you have to have that belief, if you will. It's just that I'm just sharing the kind of background attitude and belief system that permeates the work. So what I think many clients experience in this work is a kind of non-judgmentalness towards their life, towards their problems, towards their unfolding of themselves. I think many clients feel less shame about what they go through because we are believing in their experience. I'm believing in your experience. I'm not wanting to get rid of it. I'm not thinking you're bad for having it. I'm not thinking you're faulty or there's something wrong with you somehow. I'm thinking, oh, this is interesting. There's a disturbing thing coming through. Let's get to know that. Let's find out what's meaningful there. What's the wisdom that's trying to come through in your life? And what this sort of points to in a way is that we all have both conscious and unconscious experiences all the time. So I have a certain identity or identities that I'm most comfortable with. I'm a nice person. I'm a kind person. I'm giving. These are my intentions when I deal with people, etc. But then there's also unconscious things, and nowadays people kind of call it the shadow. But there's unconscious things that we're also not aware of that are also operating in our lives, that are giving off signals to others and to the world about other identities that we have that we're not identified with, right? So, and again, we all have this all the time. Thus, our dreams at night. Our dreams at night are, in a nutshell, showing various parts of ourselves that are in dynamics, are in polarities with one another, are in relationship with one another. So a dream is kind of like a snapshot of a dynamic that's happening internally between more conscious parts of ourselves and less conscious parts. And those less conscious parts are the parts that cause us disturbance. That's why we don't want to just get rid of them, because they are informing the next path in our life. They're informing where our life wants to go. So my job is to try to unfold and find that path in the moment, that process in the moment. What's the process that's trying to happen in this client who's before me? What is trying to come out? What is wanting to come out? Can I support that in a non-shaming, non-judgmental way, in a way that respects that part of that person so that it can come out more fluidly and with less suffering and pain and problematic ways. So that's kind of the approach in a nutshell. So I was trained at the Process Work Institute in Portland, Oregon. let's see, I was in the program, I was in 2 programs simultaneously. It took about 4.5 years. That was actually short for many of the people who were in the program at that time. The programs have sort of changed structure a bit over the years, but I graduated with a Master of Arts in Process Work and a diploma in process work. And for those who are outside of the community, a diploma in process work doesn't really mean much of anything. But in the community, it's the highest level of clinical training that a person can achieve. And it's the only sort of label, if you will, that the only degree that a person is considered a certified process worker when they're finished. So I don't remember the hours, the numbers off the top of my head, but it was 200 to 300 hours of personal therapy. Again, 200 to 300 hours of clinical work where I'm working directly with clients in a clinic setting and getting regular supervision and also working on case studies. So there's a heavy clinical training component to the program that I was in. I think it was an excellent program. Some of those brilliant and exceptional clinical teachers in the world, as far as I'm concerned. So, as I said, I have an international women-centered private practice. So I work primarily, and actually at this point, because we're in a time right now as I'm recording this, we're in the coronavirus is a global pandemic at the moment. So right now I'm exclusively working online with women around the world. So I work via Zoom, FaceTime, and Signal app, and the telephone. So I work with women all across the United States and in many countries. Let's see, in Japan, Australia, Canada, Mexico, the UK, Poland, Israel, South Africa, India. Lots of women around the world. I love that part of the practice um, because the diversity of women's experiences and expressions of themselves is so inspiring to me and so interesting to me. And I feel incredibly fortunate to work with these women around the US and the world. And process work itself actually really lends itself to working with an international global community. It's a very global community, process work. Huge schools in Japan, in the UK, in India, and in various countries in Africa, in Australia, in Switzerland, in Poland. There's just, in Greece, gosh, in Israel. There's so many. It's a real international community. So I was kind of trained with people from all around the world. So that's a wonderful part of its diversity. So I also, in addition to my process work training, I bring a kind of my own flavor of women's empowerment to the work. And that's largely based on my own work with internalized sexism. I've studied that intensely in my own self, in my own life. And so I've noticed that in addition to depth work, where the emphasis is more going into the difficulty and unfolding that difficulty and believing in that difficult place and kind of going down, if you will, not exactly down. It could be a variety of directions, but there's a sense of going down into something and revealing the gold in that garbage. But empowerment work, I find, is more about uplift. And so for me, it's a really nice complement to do depth psychological work with a kind of empowerment approach. Now that's going to vary from client to client and from situation to situation. And what's part of the art of what I do is discovering what's best for this client and what's best for this client in this moment. So, but for some people at some moments, empowering them, encouraging them, supporting them, helping them go over what we call edges, bringing themselves more out in the world. And as women, we suffer so tremendously from internalized sexism. It's not talked about enough. I hope to talk about it a lot more. Of course, internalized sexism is just one form of internalized oppression. So I'm also keeping my eye on internalized racism if you're a woman of color, on internalized anti-Semitism if you're a Jewish woman. I've had many Jewish clients. If you are lesbian, bisexual, questioning, then internalized homophobia is something I'm going to keep my eye on. Yeah, so many transphobia, etc. So Islamophobia, there's so many different internalized oppressions that any given woman could have spinning around as she's coming to me for work. So I'm also trying to keep my eyes and ears open to that and make sure that I speak to those and really give credence to those so that the woman before me is not simply individualizing all of her struggles, because that is one of the difficulties that comes in psychological work and in the therapeutic setting, is people tend to internalize what they're struggling with as just them, as just an individual problem with them, not realizing that they are heavily influenced by not only their family background, their cultural background, but systemic oppression. And so like I said, that's something that's on my mind. As I've kind of alluded to, I see women from all backgrounds, um, and racial and ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientation. I see many straight women, many lesbian women, bisexual women, even asexual women. So all are welcome in my practice. And I also do work with some couples. That could be opposite sex couples or also same sex women couples. So just want to put that in there. I have a strong focus and interest in emotional intimacy and long-term relationships. So that's kind of my focal point for my work with couples. I am actually going to start pursuing my PhD this fall, 2020, in fall of 2020, at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I'll be focusing my work there on emotional intimacy and long-term romantic partnerships. So that's exciting for me. I'm really looking forward to kind of diving more into that than I already have, and and um, evolving, progressing my work in that area. I also work with a lot of people who are identified as being highly sensitive people, or HSPs. I myself, if you know me, most of you know that I identify as being a highly sensitive person. I've got blog posts written about that and videos on that. So a lot of the women who come to me are attracted to working with me because I'm an HSP and they're an HSP, and that is a really nice thing to have an HSP therapist when you are an HSP yourself, because it's a whole way of being in the world and not being in the world and your unique struggles in the world that I really intimately understand. I'm a strong introvert as well. So many of my clients are introverts as well and appreciate that I know that experience kind of through and through. And then lastly, I also work with a fair number of women who consider themselves to be creatives, to be artists of some kind. I have a strong art background too, from college and post-college, and um, created a lot of art over the last 6 or 8 years. I had an art studio and did fine art photography and painting and drawing and lots of sewing and weaving. So I've kind of done a lot of different artistic things, and I'm very interested in the creative process itself. So some of my women clients talk to me about their creative process. And even if they're not an artist person per se, many women I find are just interested in leading what Elizabeth Gilbert calls a creative life, and that can mean so many things in a very broad way. So I'm very supportive of that kind of work as well. So I hope that gives you a good sense of my training, my approach to working with clients and some of the nuances of what I bring, my personal flavor to my work. Thanks so much for watching, and take care.